On November 19th, 1994, Fox Kids Network aired the first episode of Spider-Man the Animated Series. In this show's 4-year run and over the course of 5 seasons and 65 total episodes, this show fundamentally shaped a whole generation, if not multiple generations, public view of Spider-Man. Now, this show by no means is responsible for how popular and successful the character of Spider-Man is, but this show 100% helped elevate Spider-Man's publicity to a whole nother level at the time. Spider-Man the Animated Series was not the first Spider-Man TV show, but I think the animated series was able to amount to a level of success that the TV shows that came before them were never able to achieve. In the 20th century, due to the limitations of animation at the time, even though there were prior Spider-Man TV shows that came before the animated series, like the 1960s show simply titled Spider-Man, and the more successful but lesser-known spin-off, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, these shows were never able to achieve as much or strike a chord with the audience as hard as the animated series was able to. And on top of that, the animated series was the first of its kind, tying in previous existing TV shows, creating the first ever cinematic universe with the 90s X-Men series. This is one of the many reasons that Spider-Man the Animated Series was so successful and beloved by many fans. So stick around as we take a look back and review Spider-Man the Animated Series. But before we get into that, I'm starting my first ever series on this channel where I'm going to be personally watching, reviewing, and ranking every Spider-Man TV show. Now, I already made a video and reviewed The Ultimate Spider-Man, so if you want to know my opinion on that show, then check out this video that I'll link to the screen right now. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just put that show at B tier. Again, if you want to know my explanation on why I think that way, then go ahead and watch the video. Now, let's just get into reviewing the animated series. As stated earlier, Spider-Man the Animated Series first aired in 1994, but to fully understand the importance of the show, we have to go back to the early 90s. The creation of the show started in the 90s when Marvel Comics was going bankrupt. After the creation of comic books and the boom that came with successes like Batman, Superman, the X-Men, and then of course Spider-Man, in the 1970s, collecting different types of comics became the type of investment for the public. During the Copper Age of comics, more iconic covers were being created and developed and sold for extreme prices. Examples of these comics were Secret Wars that featured the black suit Spider-Man, or Batman the Killing Joke, and then of course the Death of Superman, which was actually sold in like a special black plastic packaging. Because of the boom in demand for special editions or alternative covers, Marvel and DC artists were becoming sort of like micro-celebrities. And then, of course, after a while, fatigue began to set in and the big bubble burst, and no one was really reading comic books anymore. It was actually just the die-hard fans that were reading them, and that left Marvel Comics specifically in a huge amount of comic book debt, where comics had been written and printed and the artists had been paid for them, but the public had no interest in getting the comics. They already had their little comic book fix. So people ultimately stopped buying comics for a while, and because of this, Marvel Comics again was in a large amount of debt with unsold comics that had already been printed, along with the stock price and sales plummeting. Now, enter in Toy Biz CEO Avi Arad. If you've been following Spider-Man media for the past decade or so, then you should be familiar with this name. At the time, after hearing that Fox Kids Animation was going to be making their own Spider-Man animated TV show, Avi signed on as the show's executive producer and was quoted as saying he would like the series to just be one big toy commercial. The reason he wanted the show to be one big toy commercial is so his company would create and then produce the toys, of course, and sell them to the public. It's also full public knowledge that Avi wanted to create a show for all of the Marvel characters so he could ultimately sell more toys, but this meant there was a lot riding on the backs of the show to be successful. If this show was a big hit, then ultimately it would revive Marvel's reputation in the public eye and set them up for big time success. Even though Avi's mainstream motive through his entire infamous history with Marvel and Spider-Man specifically is driven by the motivation to sell toys, most notably known for him forcing Sam Raimi to shove Venom into Spider-Man 3 so more Venom toys would be sold, of course, but Avi needed this show to be a big success. There was a lot riding on the show's back at the time. Luckily for Avi and the team involved, the show was an amazing hit. Not to say that this was an easy feat. The show had to navigate their way through a monstrosity worth of limitations and censorship from the network. And this leads me to what I believe is the show's most infamous part, that being their limitations and censorship. Allow me to share you some of my favorite ones before we get into all of that. Throughout the show, Spider-Man is never allowed to punch someone directly, Morbius was never allowed to suck blood, so instead he had to take plasma from people using his suction cups on his hands instead of his fangs, because, you know, he's a vampire. And my most favorite example of the show's censorship being so harsh is that the Sinister Six, you know, Spider-Man's most, famous rogues gallery of villains, I don't know. They were referred to as the Insidious Six. Now, why is Insidious better than Sinister? I don't know, but the network thought that Sinister sounded too evil for kids to hear. And if you thought these were bad, the show also couldn't allow people to break through any glass, whether that be like windows or car glass breaking. They couldn't say the words kill, death, or die, and the network only allowed laser guns, not traditional bullet-powered guns. People in the show are also not allowed to die on screen, so if you had a character that died, they would die off screen, or you would just hear through dialogue like, oh yeah, that character's dead now. And then lastly, Carnage, or his human counterpart Cletus Cassidy, was not a serial killer in the show like he traditionally is. Instead, he was a lunatic. But gladly, despite the multiple network censorship and the behind-the-scenes drama, this show is a massive hit and a huge success. And it was just the thing Marvel needed at the time to jolt them back to life. Now, enough talking about the show's actual real-life implications and what happened behind the scenes. Let's get to reviewing and recapping the whole show, starting with Season 1. So the official synopsis for the show reads as the following. The animated series chronicles the story of a single 19-year-old Peter Parker attending his first year at Empire State University, trying to get through his part-time job as a photographer for the Daily Bugle, adjusting to his new relationships, and growing into his newfound alter ego as the Amazing Spider-Man. Now, in my opinion, this is a very simple and grounded way to start off a Spider-Man series, so right out the gate, we're off to a great start. Within the first episode, we're introduced to Peter, of course, J. Jonah Jameson, Dr. Kirk Connors and his alter ego, the Lizard, and Eddie Brock. One thing I have to commend this show for before we can continue is the world building. This show made my childhood and was one of the many main reasons that I'm so familiar with Spider-Man's rogue gallery and then Marvel characters as a whole. The Fantastic Four, the Avengers, and the Defenders are all name-dropped in Episode 1, which to my mind is absolutely insane, especially in the 90s. Now, you might think this might be in a bloated way, but it's actually done in a really smooth way that doesn't feel like we're being force-fed into this lore and exposition and world building. It's all done in a very natural way. Within the first episode, we keep going back to and are introduced to the Lizard, Doc Ock, Kraven, Mysterio, Scorpion, Smythe, and of course the most important villain in the series of all, Kingpin. After these quick introductions, we get the first arc of the series titled The Alien Costume, Part 1, 2, and 3. And as you guessed it, yeah, this has to do with Venom. Now, my first major gripe with this show is that they introduced the Venom storyline way too soon. They should have been something in like the later seasons, but it's pretty early on in Season 1, and the TLDR is that in the 3-episode arc, it's pretty standard Spider-Man stuff. Peter gets the symbiote, he gets the black suit, and then of course over a few weeks he slowly succumbs to the symbiote and starts becoming more evil. Then, Peter recognizes what's going on, he gets the suit off him, Eddie Brock gets the symbiote, yada yada yada, turns into Venom, and then he's defeated. Pretty standard stuff, like I said. But I can't knock it too much because we get this amazing iconic line delivered from Peter's voice actor, Christopher Daniel Barnes.
Shocker! You can't escape me! I'll chase you to the ends of the earth!
Now, this isn't a bad arc by any means, I just think it's way too early on in the show to do Venom, but what I'm thinking happened is Avi Arad wanted to get that sweet Venom action figure money early on in the toy sales, so he said, hey, let's just throw in Venom, because the show is just one big toy commercial. At the end of the season, we get a 2-episode arc with the Hobgoblin, and then the final episode serving as the season finale with the Chameleon. I'll talk about the decision to make the Hobgoblin arc before the Green Goblin later, but this episode with the Chameleon is honestly so good. Chameleon, when he's done right, is such a great villain and is one of my favorite Spider-Man villains. This episode solidifies that pretty early on in the series. And then as we close out of Season 1, we see Peter Parker chasing MJ off into the sunset. Pretty cute standard stuff. Season 1 is very standard, safe, by-the-book Spider-Man stuff, so I really don't have a whole lot to say about this season as a whole. It's pretty good.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Now, here's a quick overview of Season 2. The season starts off with the infamous Insidious 6 in a 2-part episode arc. The team follows the Chameleon, Mysterio, Scorpion, Rhino, Shocker, and then of course is led by Doc Ock. Later on in the season, we'll see villains like Hydro Man, who's a fan favorite of mine, and I honestly feel like we don't see him a whole lot in other Spider-Man media, so it was good seeing him. And then we get what I can only describe as like multiple team-up episodes, and this is what I meant when the show really fleshed out the Marvel Universe as a whole, and little Cody absolutely loved this. During these team-up episodes, we see people like the Wolverine, the Punisher, and Blade. The main theme that I think Season 2 deals with the most has to be body horror. For a good chunk of the season, we follow Dr. Michael Morbius as he gets turned into a vampire, and we witness a heartbreaking love story unfold between Morbius and his girlfriend. Morbius is constantly torn between his flesh and his desire for blood, and his heart just not wanting to go down this evil path, but he has a physical desire for it and he has to succumb to that. It's a truly heartbreaking story to watch and ultimately understand more as an adult. Another example of body horror in this arc is Peter gets turned into the human-sized spider, and then Morbius even gets turned into a bigger, more monster-sized vampire. There's a few episodes that also deal with body horror, with Dr. Connor's tragic transformation back into the Lizard. Then, in the Season 2 finale, Peter deals with the Vulture stealing his youth, resulting in Peter turning into an old man. Again, here's a reoccurring theme of body horror. And since the Vulture stole Spider-Man's DNA, and with him still having part of that man-spider, monster-esque thing in him. The Vulture then transformed into this nightmarish, like human-sized vulture nightmare monster vampire spider thing. It's honestly so terrifying. And then of course Peter ultimately defeats his enemies, and then we move into season 3. But before we get into season 3, I really just want to talk about my overall takeaway from season 2. This season dealt with a whole lot more mature adult themes that I did not pick up on as a child when watching the show. As I started doing research for this video and rewatching the series, I was shocked to see how many complex and compelling and mature storylines there are in this show. Let's take the Morbius arc that I just spoke about, for example. If you take the time to watch this arc, it's a tragic love story of someone who just wants to be with his girlfriend, but after being transformed into a vampire, he's no longer the man that he once was, and his girlfriend, his true love, wants nothing to do with him. This is nothing like the Morbius movie that came out. It's very well done. Now, going back and watching these episodes as an adult gave me a whole new appreciation for these stories in this series, and I honestly cannot recommend them enough. Please watch this show if you have not. Now, let's get into season 3. Like I said a few seconds ago, season 3 introduces us to a more mystical side of the world building. We meet Doctor Strange and we get a nice 2-episode arc dedicated to him, and it's cute and it's fun, but man, I cannot take my eyes off this Doctor Strange design. This is peak. It looks so good and I love it so much. We're then introduced to no other than the Green Goblin, when coincidentally Norman Osborn dies in an explosion at Oscorp, and after the Green Goblin starts flying around, we as the audience start to question if Harry is actually the Goblin, because Norman is out of the picture. We get a fantastic episode where it's revealed that Norman was involved in the previous explosion, but because of this he was exposed to goblin gas, and then finding the Hobgoblin's tech from early on in the show, he became the Green Goblin. This is cheesy, but I kind of like it. It's a different origin story to the Green Goblin, but again, this show can do whatever it wants. It's not anything like special. It's its own origin, and I think if you kind of change the backstory of characters, as long as it's done in a right way, then I'll let it slide. Norman and the Green Goblin is ultimately defeated by Spider-Man, and he gets this dumb version of comic book amnesia where Spider-Man says that Norman doesn't remember who he is because the Green Goblin's defeated and all this type of stuff. And again, I don't really love this type of like comic book amnesia trope where the villain gets defeated and he doesn't remember who he was, like in Spider-Man 3, but this is a kid's cartoon, so I'll let this one slide as well. It's okay. The next arc in season 3, Peter gets framed for treason by Kingpin's son, and I would only imagine that this is a workaround for the censorship not being able to say murder. Peter getting framed for treason versus getting framed for murder. Come on, we know what's going on here. But Peter's lawyer is then no other than, of course, Matt Murdock, and over the course of the 2-episode arc, we get a good Spider-Man and Daredevil team up as they take down Kingpin's son, Alistair Smythe, and ultimately clear Peter Parker's name. At the end of these episodes is a cute little moment where Matt Murdock knows that Peter is Spider-Man because of his enhanced senses and stuff, but he doesn't say anything, so the interaction between them is so wholesome and cute. I love it. Peter's like, Spider-Man's like, oh, I wonder who that Daredevil guy is, and then Daredevil's like, I don't know, but make sure to tell your friend Peter Parker he's a good guy. It's funny, it's cute, I love it. Then in standard superhero and even just TV show fashion, we get a villain of the week. We get 2 episodes, 2 villain of the week style episodes with Tombstone and then the Spot as well. It's the Spot in this he's a meme. He's not what the Spot is in the Spider-Verse films. Then the final 2 episodes of the season are titled Goblin War and Turning Point. The arc starts off with Peter and MJ expressing their love to one another and finally becoming a good couple, right? But MJ says how she's nervous to be around Peter because in the past she's always being involved in attacks with Hydro Man, Venom, Dormammu, and all these other villains, and she wants to keep Peter Parker safe because her job as a reporter, she's always being involved in this. And Peter explains to her listen babe, you got nothing to worry about, I will keep you safe. And so we're then introduced once again back to the Hobgoblin, but this time he has this device that allows him to travel to other dimensions and more importantly suck other people and objects into the Hobgoblin then uses his device to start robbing banks and doing other standard bad guy stuff, but he then goes to Kingpin and says he needs his help. Later on, Kingpin kidnaps Norman Osborn, and when Osborn awakes, he sees that he's back at Oscorp, and he's having flashbacks to being the Green Goblin. And if you're a Spider-Man fan, then you obviously know where this is going. Norman gets drugged and gets turned back into the Green Goblin, and over the course of the 2 episodes, the 2 goblins fight for control of the device, and ultimately the OG Green Goblin wins, and he takes the device. Now, after a long fight, the Green Goblin tries to use the portal device that the Hobgoblin had to escape Spider-Man and the Hobgoblin, and he's told that the device is on low battery or something like that, and if he attempts to use the device, he could get trapped in limbo, which is this weird interdimensional place where if you're trying to portal somewhere and you get stuck, you're stuck in limbo. It's hard to explain. But the Green Goblin then says it's better to be trapped in limbo than be trapped by Spider-Man. So the Green Goblin uses the device and he escapes. And at the end of the episode, it's revealed that he successfully was able to teleport, and he vows to get revenge on Spider-Man, Kingpin, and the Hobgoblin. And then over the course of the last episode, the Green Goblin stalks Spider-Man until he finally finds that his true identity is Peter Parker. The Green Goblin decides the best way to get his revenge on Peter is by ruining every part of his everyday life. That, of course, includes Aunt May and MJ. And then over the episode, we get the Green Goblin emotionally tormenting Peter Parker, where he plays this game of like cat and mouse, not knowing if the Green Goblin's going to attack Aunt May next or attack MJ. And so they're always going back and forth. As soon as Peter tries to save MJ and make sure she's fine, he's like, well, now I have to go check on Aunt May. And so they go back and forth. This ultimately culminates in MJ getting kidnapped and taken to the top of the George Washington Bridge. This part's important. So here we get this really interesting comic book style Green Goblin fight, where the Green Goblin is constantly switching between being Norman and the Goblin. And at the end of the fight, MJ falls off the bridge, but right before she hits the water in the river, the time dilution device transports her to another dimension. But because Peter was fighting the Goblin, he thinks MJ fell in the water. And Peter not being able to find MJ anywhere in the river is heartbroken because he believes that his love has drowned. This causes him to go ballistic and continue fighting the Goblin. At the end of the fight, the time dilation device is now broken, causing this imbalance in the portal, sucking the Green Goblin inside and then closing shortly after. Now, the Green Goblin and MJ are both stuck in limbo. Defeated and broken, Peter has a breakdown as we close out in Season 3, but right before the episode and the season ends, we get this final horrifying shot of MJ screaming for help as she travels through limbo, except no one can hear her. This by far had the most impactful ending to any season in my mind. Rewatching this again as an adult genuinely upset me because there's nothing Peter can do. I truly empathize with him. I can't do this show enough justice again, so please, if you haven't watched this show, make time to do this in the future. I cannot recommend it enough. Season 4 is the shortest season in the show by far, but in my opinion deals with some of the most emotional storylines we have in this whole series. This story wastes no time at all, and we pick up right where we left off in Season 3. Peter's grieving from dealing with the loss of MJ, and having no one else to turn to, he goes to his friend Felicia Hardy to talk about his loss. As Peter stalks Felicia to her apartment, he sees Doc Ock upstairs talking to Felicia's mother and making some sort of deal with them. So then naturally Spider-Man arrives to the scene and Doc Ock flees. Later on in the episode, we get a little bit of shenanigans with Captain America doing a team up with Spider-Man, and we fight the Red Skull, Kingpin, and Doc Ock. This culminates in Felicia getting captured and injected with the Super Soldier Serum, transforming her into the Black Cat. Now, I for one am not the biggest Black Cat fan, so I don't know all of her standard lore, but it always puzzled me how she has the skills that she does and she can move and continue to fight crime the way she does. But for some reason, I just haven't looked into her power set or backstory, so I don't know her true origin story or skill set. That being said, I really do like this explanation for her getting her powers in the series. It's very simple and standard. Kingpin wants to get back at Felicia's father, so he injects her with this serum to get the information out of her, and then bada bing, bada boom, now she has powers. It's pretty easy and simple. So that's all you really need to know about the start of the season, and now Black Cat's around. So the next few episodes follow Spider-Man and Black Cat working together, and then Kraven shows up and is quickly defeated by the two. Nothing really need to focus on with that. So the fun is then ruined when Smythe kidnaps, or should I say catnaps, Black Cat. I'm sorry, I had to say that, but after being saved, Black Cat asks Peter if they're truly just partners or they're just a convenience that they were working together. And so Peter says how he really cares about her, and Black Cat lifts up his mask just enough to kiss him, and then she swings off. After leaving, Peter is then conflicted with his emotions. He's still grieving from the loss of MJ, but he realizes that he eventually has to move on, and he's starting to catch feelings from Black Cat. Shortly after, Morbius' body is found in hibernation, and he's brought back to New York City, where then Dr. Connors proclaims to the press that he can revert him from his monster body form back to his human form. This experiment works, but only momentarily, reverting Michael Morbius back to his vampire form. Unknown to everyone, Kingpin is the one who's facilitating this plan and is spying on Morbius and Dr. Connors so he can ultimately get Morbius' DNA to become immortal. After being awoken from hibernation, Morbius flees the scene. Black Cat then finds him and reveals to him that she's his long-lost love, Felicia. Morbius tells him to go away and that he's a monster, but due to the state she's in, she will do anything to help him. I forgot to mention early on, but when I was talking about the Morbius arc in the previous seasons, his true love is Felicia Hardy, so that's why Peter hasn't really been romantic with her and only sees her as a friend, but there is an on and off again relationship with Felicia and Morbius. This storyline then culminates with Morbius being transformed from his monster vampire form back to his human vampire form, where he then flies away, promising not to harm any of his loved ones. To finish out the series in this whole vampire plot, the next few episodes follow Black Cat, Morbius, and Blade as they take on a super vampire named Miriam, who turns a whole lot of people in the city into vampires. And then after temporarily defeating Miriam, all the vampires go back to normal humans and Miriam flies away. After all of this, Morbius, Blade, and Black Cat say they're going to leave New York in hopes of tracking down Miriam across the globe and ending him for good. Spider-Man, after hearing all of this, tells Black Cat that he wants to go with her, but she reassures him that he's the defender of New York City and he has to stay here and protect New York. Peter reluctantly then agrees as he watches Black Cat leave with Blade and Morbius. Like many Spider-Man fans, I like Black Cat for multiple reasons, but there's not a lot of media depicting Spider-Man and Black Cat's friendship and relationship. The Spider-Man game on the PS4 does a pretty decent job at this, but the show really makes me care about the characters way more than any other adaptation has. But now Peter is all alone, and he exclaims that Black Cat is gone, MJ is gone, and his friend Felicia Hardy is gone too, so Peter really has no one to turn to, but he reassures himself that it has to get better from here because he feels as if he's at rock bottom and things can only go up from here. I, for one, prefer my Spider-Man stories to be more grounded, so I'm not a huge fan of this version and like this specific Morbius subplot with all the vampires. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel bad for Peter here. After Black Cat leaves him, he's all alone once again, and he's reminded again that things have to get better, and that he's ultimately making a heroic sacrifice by one, choosing to stay and do the right thing, but also not chasing after just a physical romantic relationship with Black Cat. This is also an arc that I recommend checking out, purely just for the ending. Now, here we are at the end of Season 4 with the much anticipated return of the Green Goblin. The story starts off with Harry getting visions from the Green Goblin, and then we, as well as him, find out that the Green Goblin is stuck in this sort of limbo state that we last saw him in, but he's somehow able to communicate with Harry. The Goblin says that if Harry does what he says, he'll help him find his father Norman. The Goblin then leads Harry to where he will eventually expose himself to Goblin gas inside of Oscorp and slowly starts transforming him into the Goblin. While all this is going on, the Punisher is hired by Mary Jane's mother to help her find MJ since she's still missing. She says that she believes Peter Parker has something to do with the disappearance of Mary Jane, and that's all really the Punisher needs to work off of, and that she just really wants to see her daughter. We then cut to Peter and Liz Allen deciding to bring Harry a pizza to cheer him up since he's been so depressed since his father disappeared. When they arrive to his apartment, they see an explosion at the top as they watch the Green Goblin fly out from his apartment on a glider. Peter realizes he has to go, so he leaves Liz and tells her to go upstairs as he swings off into action. After fighting the Goblin, Peter takes off the Goblin's mask to reveal that underneath it's not Norman, but instead Harry. Dumbfounded by this, Peter's stunned and kind of falls to the ground, which gives Harry enough time to escape. The next day, Peter Parker, not Spider-Man, but Peter goes to see Harry in his apartment. He finds that the door is unlocked, so he just kind of wanders in and starts snooping. He finds the location of 6 different Goblin hideouts and decides to start investigating them, hoping to eventually find his friend. As Peter leaves the apartment, we see that the Punisher is stalking Peter throughout this whole process. Upon arriving at the first location, the Punisher meets Peter there and says that he was hired to investigate MJ and the 3 names that keep popping back up: Peter Parker, the Green Goblin, and Spider-Man. The Punisher says that these 3 names are pinned to MJ and that he believes Peter Parker is the Green Goblin. Peter then picks up a pair of Goblin gauntlets next to him and shoots at the Punisher, and then tries to fly away on a makeshift Goblin glider, but he's too slow because he doesn't know how to work it, and the Punisher shoots a missile at him where they fall down to the ground on a rooftop. After fighting for a little bit, the Green Goblin then flies over Peter and the Punisher, to which Peter looks up at the sky and says, "That's not me. How could I be the Green Goblin if the Goblin's up there?" Peter explains that he's just trying to find MJ as well, so he gives the Punisher the coordinates to the other locations of the Goblin bases that he's found, and then the Punisher leaves. Peter deduces that Harry's going to be going to Oscorp because that's where Norman's base of operations for everything was. We then cut to Harry talking to the Green Goblin inside of a mirror, saying that he just wants to find his father and have his father come back. He doesn't want to do any evil Goblin stuff. Spider-Man then swings in and sees Harry talking to himself in the mirror, realizing that Harry's gone completely Goblin and has gone crazy. Spider-Man explains that his father's not coming back and that he's the one that defeated the Green Goblin. Spider-Man explains that his father's not coming back because his father was the Green Goblin. Harry then looks in the mirror, asking the Goblin if this is correct, to which the Goblin pulls off his mask in the mirror to reveal his father's face. Going completely insane, Harry realizes that the only way to ever gain his father's respect is to fully embrace and become the Green Goblin. Harry then goes into Goblin mode and Spider-Man starts chasing him, realizing that he's being led to the same bridge that Norman and MJ disappeared at. Then the Punisher shows up and shoots a missile at the Green Goblin, causing Harry to fall into the same river. After searching for Harry in the river, Peter realizes that the same fate that happened to his father has also happened to Harry. Peter doesn't see this, but us the audience do as we watch the Punisher drag Harry's body from shore. Now we cut to Norman Osborn still in limbo as he explains what a failure his son is. And as he's getting upset, right before we cut away, we see MJ walk on that same beach, whereas Norman and us the audience are just as confused, wondering how MJ got on the shore. Later that night, while walking home, Peter exclaims that his life is getting worse. His friend Harry is now missing, MJ's still not been found, and he still isn't allowed to be with Black Cat. Peter opens the front door to his house where he sees the Punisher in his living room with Harry tied up. The Punisher points a gun at Peter and asks him one last time where MJ is. But before he can explain, the doorbell rings behind him, and us the audience, as well as everyone in the living room, is just as confused when we see that when Peter opens the door, MJ is standing there. But before she can explain what happened and how she's back, the Punisher rushes her off back to her house where she can be reunited with her mother. So that ends the first episode of the season finale arc that reintroduces MJ back into the mix. The next episode in the arc is titled The Haunting of Mary Jane Watson. And you would think that this would just be like a really cool episode explaining the backstory of what happened to MJ and how she disappeared and how she was able to come back out of limbo. But sadly, instead, this episode is more of a villain of the week episode with Mysterio showing back up. After the two get into multiple shenanigans, it's honestly not that good of an episode to watch, and the main takeaway from the episode is at the end, because after MJ, of course, is a damsel in distress, she's saved by Spider-Man, and Spider-Man reveals himself to be Peter Parker, and then we cut to black, and that's the end of the episode. Now, there's 2 more episodes in the season, but I don't consider them to be like season finales, because nothing really happens. One of the 2 episodes, again, is a Villain of the Week episode with the Prowler, and the other has Peter proposing to MJ where she finds out his secret identity from the previous episode. Now, you might think to yourself, wow, that's important. Why is that not part of like the season finale or whatever? Well, that's about 5% of the episode. The other 95% of the episode deals with Dr. Connors having these like adult lizard babies, and it's mid. It's not that good. You don't need to watch it. The only important thing to take away is that Peter proposed and MJ says yes. And then that's it. That's the end of Season 4. Overall, Season 4 deals with some of the most emotional beats in the series, dealing with the interpersonal conflict between Peter not wanting to commit to Black Cat after mourning from MJ, and then wanting to chase after her across the world, and then realizing that his best friend was turned into the monster that his father was, along with MJ returning from the dead, essentially. This isn't my favorite season in the show. I'd have to give that to Season 5, but nonetheless, this is a very, very good, enjoyable season. So again, highly recommend you watching this. So we'll rank all the seasons at the end of Season 5 once I review them, but it's a pretty good season. It's just not my favorite. Lastly, here we are, the final season, Season 5. The first episode of the season starts off with Peter and Mary Jane on their wedding day, and before they can get their happy ending, Harry Osborn, filled with jealousy and rage, crashes into the wedding as the Green Goblin. Over the course of this episode, Spider-Man and Black Cat team up to take down the Green Goblin and the Scorpion. At the end of the episode, everything gets resolved, and we finally get Peter Parker and Mary Jane getting married. Peter and MJ are walking out of the church, and J. Jonah Jameson stops Peter and hands him the keys to a new car. Honestly, watching this for the first time is such like a bittersweet moment, seeing that like J. Jonah Jameson has a sweet spot and is giving Peter the keys to a new vehicle, but then it's kind of abrupted by finding out that the vehicle is just a Daily Bugle van. But I do appreciate the versions of J. Jonah Jameson that have a soft spot, and as the episode ends, we finally get the 2 happy couples driving off into the sunset. Now, the first arc of this season starts off with Peter finding out that his parents were government agents, and I just have to say right at the gate that I hate this idea, and I hate the whole idea of like the backstory of Peter Parker's parents always trying to be someone important, whether that be like government agents or S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. And I mean, we saw this in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and a lot of people don't like that movie and that subplot specifically, so I completely understand. And honestly, to make matters even worse, this arc it's pretty mid. It's not great, and I'm not a huge fan of it. This arc revolves around Spider-Man teaming up with these like forgotten World War II heroes as they go on this adventure fighting Red Skull with Captain America and stuff. And I mean, it's cute watching Spider-Man get to work with these like older, lesser heroes, and he learns a few quotes from them and like learns the ropes and stuff. But other than that, it's not that interesting of an arc. So if you're gonna like skip around and stuff, you can skip this one. Over the course of this 5-episode arc, I was constantly checking out, and while rewatching the series for this video, I skipped this one, I'm gonna be honest. This next arc though, this arc is peak, and I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that this arc is more emotionally effective to me than the 2 arcs that are like the Secret Wars and Spider-Verse arc at the end of this season. So the title for this arc is called The Return of Hydro Man. And to quickly summarize the events, Hydro Man shows back up again after being defeated earlier on in the series, and he kidnaps Mary Jane right when he comes back. Bro's not playing around at all. So Peter, after having nightmares of Mary Jane disappearing, he figures out through the events of what happened in his nightmares exactly where Mary Jane was taken to. And after arriving at the location of this underwater science base, Spider-Man is introduced to Professor Miles Warren. And I'd like to say pretty confidently that I'm super familiar with a lot of Spider-Man characters and lore, but I'm not too familiar with Miles Warren. So if there's someone out there that knows more about him than I do, just let me know who he is, because I was blindsided by this reveal of who this scientist is. And so, spoiler alert, of course, the scientist is evil. And he explains that both the returning of Hydro Man and MJ were orchestrated by him. MJ and Hydro Man are both clones of the original versions of themselves, and he's been working on this cloning process. So both MJ and Hydro Man have the memories of their original self, but again, they're just like clones. He says that MJ and Hydro Man are essentially his Adam and Eve for his cloning process, and how he originally made Hydro Man, but now he made MJ because Hydro Man wanted MJ, kind of how Adam wanted Eve in the Bible. So this explains how MJ now has the same powers as Hydro Man, and we see that Hydro Man is heartbroken by this. The only reason he wants to be back is just to be with MJ because he's in love with her. And honestly, finding this out is such a heartbreaking revolution that this whole time, as Peter and MJ have been reunited after she died or disappeared, that she's just been a clone this entire time, and a clone of Hydro Man nonetheless. And to make matters worse, at the end of the episode and at the end of the arc, we get the most tragic and heartbreaking ending in all of Spider-Man media. At the end of this episode, the professor explains that during the cloning process, he messed up, and the cloning process isn't perfect, and that both Hydro Man and MJ's DNA is unstable and that they're about to start falling apart. Hydro Man starts to evaporate and disintegrate, and in a fit of rage, he destroys the whole lab and all of the professor's research. And right after that, we cut to MJ on the floor, starting to evaporate as well. And here we get the most heartbreaking scene in all of Spider-Man media, in my opinion. Spider-Man's helpless. There's nothing he can do but sit back and watch the love of his life, his wife, evaporate and die. Realizing that the real Mary Jane is never going to come back, and the clone that he thought was her is also gone forever. Both voice actors in this put in a heartbreaking and amazing performance, and Peter's final cry for plea has struck with me for years since. Now, I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that this has stuck with me and that I've had actual dreams and nightmares of being in this situation. As a kid, I was terrified by this idea of watching the love of your life just disintegrate and evaporate in front of you, and there's nothing you can do. And then after getting recently married this past year, I can only relate more and more to Peter, which only emphasizes how heartbreaking this episode is. And then we finally close out on the series as we're left in a truly heartbreaking Wait. No. Actually, there's more. Yeah, now it's time for Secret Wars. And then Madam Web just spawns in at the end of the episode when Peter's heartbroken and sucks him into this portal and says that if you can help me, I'll help you find the real MJ. So now it's time for Secret Wars. And this begins with Spider-Man being transported in to meet the Beyonder, much like other Spider-Man and Secret Wars adaptations. The Beyonder then explains that Spider-Man is chosen to be a part of this experiment for a total battle of good versus evil. The Beyonder has this planet that has no sin, no evilness and stuff, and he just wants to see who would ultimately win, good versus evil. And he announces that he already teleported and sent Doc Ock, Smythe, the Lizard, Red Skull, and of course Dr. Doom to the planet to go ahead and introduce evil to the population. And that Spider-Man is going to be the leader for the good guys, and that he's being able to... And Spider-Man, being the leader of the good guys, is able to choose his team to go fight the forces of evil. Spider-Man chooses the Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Captain America, and Storm. Now, why he chose Storm, I'm not too sure, other than the fact that he says she has a lot of powers. I thought he should have picked Wolverine, but whatever. So then our team of heroes gets transported into the perfect planet of the Beyonder, right? So after fighting the Lizard, our team kidnaps him and is able to help him with the helps of Iron Man and Reed Richards, and they're able to perform this Lizard reverse sort of transformation thing, where he's a smaller version of the Lizard, but he's also kind of like Smart Hulk and Professor Hulk, where he's stuck in the Lizard body, but he has Dr. Connors' brains. So as the episode ends, Spider-Man says to Dr. Connors that he's going to record and journal this war, so that quote-unquote, the greatest war ever fought isn't a secret war.
So that the greatest war ever fought isn't a secret war.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
I'm gonna be honest, I think they were just padding for runtime with episode 2 because it's kind of filler in my opinion. But that being said, Fantastic Four goes after Dr. Doom, and then the rest of the team with Captain America, Iron Man, the Lizard, Spider-Man, and then Black Cat, because they find a way to bring Black Cat into this. They all choose to go after Red Skull. And after Black Cat attacks the Red Skull on her own, she ends up getting kidnapped from the rest of the team, and they have to rescue her, and then the Red Skull escapes. That's essentially the whole arc of episode 2, so you can kind of just skip it. It's it's pretty filler. So now we're in episode 3 of Secret Wars, and we see that this war hasn't been going on over the course of like a few hours, but this truly is a war, and that everyone here has been feeling the effects of the bad guys, and that this has been a war going on for months now. So Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four go to recapture the Thing after he was previously captured in the previous episode from Doctor Doom. And we see that he's no longer in his Thing, like rock form, but now that Ben Grimm's has been transformed into a human. He explains that Doctor Doom now has this newfound power, and he's able to manipulate and transform matter out of thin air. Doctor Doom then kidnaps all the rest of the heroes that were not involved in this and explains how he now has part of the Beyonder's powers. And because of this, he's created essentially his own utopia on this planet, and where he can essentially be a god as well. And he says how he wants to stay here and live in harmony with the rest of the heroes. And of course the heroes don't agree with this, so then he sends them all away. Then while the rest of the team is thinking of what to do and is strategizing, Spider-Man solo pushes back to Doctor Doom while everyone else is taking shelter and rest. Doctor Doom being overcome with power and is like spawning these beasts from his subconscious while he's sleeping. And all these beasts are like attacking Doctor Doom and the rest of the people on the planet. After choosing not to give up his power, the Thing ultimately betrays Doctor Doom and shoots him with that same transformation gun, and then that ends the battle, and the Beyonder comes out and says that good has defeated evil. Spider-Man then asks the Beyonder what the point of all of this was, but then he is transported away back to Madam Web, and he says, "Your true task awaits." Now, I know this show is supposed to be one big toy commercial, but I can't help but think that this arc was a little rushed. I mean, there was one filler episode in the middle, in my opinion, but the ending just doesn't feel that like grand, right? So it's Secret Wars, or like this huge comic book event that everyone knows. Like even the MCU is making Secret Wars, but the ending to this just felt a little lackluster. But that doesn't matter, because now it's time for peak. It's the moment that we've all been waiting for. It's time for Spider-Verse, but in this series it's titled Spider Wars. The last 2 episodes of this series start off with Spider-Man being transported to an alternate New York City, which is in shambles. This is like on fire, it's being destroyed, it's like a nightmare version of New York City. Here we see that both the Green Goblin and Hobgoblin are working together for an evil Carnage Spider-Man. Our Spider-Man is then taken back by Madam Web and is introduced to his multiverse counterparts. We see all of the different Spider-Men from the Spider-Verse being introduced. Ben Reilly then explains this dimension's Peter Parker is the Spider-Carnage guy that we saw earlier. This Carnage is a mix of a clone of a dead Spider-Man from Miles Warren. Here we get more exposition and see what the main mission is, to prevent Spider-Carnage from destroying the whole multiverse. After a whole lot more of exposition, we see our main Peter get sent to the Iron Peter's world, and this was like a perfect utopia of what Spider-Man could have in New York City. Everything here is perfect. Spider-Man's engaged to Gwen Stacy, he's filthy rich, and he's a celebrity. Spider-Carnage then shows up out of nowhere and kidnaps Gwen after finding out that our Peter is in his universe. On a rooftop, he opens up his device and is about to suck up the whole world and destroy everything, when Peter brings out Uncle Ben from this timeline to talk some sense into Spider-Carnage. After a tear-jerking speech from Ben, he's able to inspire Spider-Carnage to get rid of the symbiote inside of him, but the symbiote is too strong and he can't do it, to which Peter closes down the portal and jumps in at the last second, destroying himself and the symbiote. Our Peter hugs Uncle Ben and says that he will always have him in his heart, but he has to go, and he says goodbye. As we close out on the series, we see Peter get transported to our universe, where Spider-Man is his fictional character, and he meets his creator, Stan Lee. Spider-Man gives him a swing around the city and says how Stan made him into the hero he is, and he'll be forever thankful for him. Spider-Man says that for the first time in his life, he finally feels at peace, and he would not want to change a thing. I don't know, man. I get that I'm a huge Spider-Man fanboy, and that I have a YouTube channel where I've mainly only posted Spider-Man content, and it also might be due to the fact that Stan Lee has passed, and hearing him voice himself in this meta ending, this part really got to me, I'm not gonna lie. But as we close out on Spider-Man the Animated Series, Madam Web picks up Peter Parker and transports him away, saying that they're going off to find Mary Jane, giving Peter the happiness that he finally deserves. And that's it. That's the series. I love this show so much, and I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I know this is definitely going to be a longer video, so if you're sticking around this far, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed. But really quickly, I just want to highlight some things that I didn't really get to show off in this video, but I really did like. I didn't really know where to put it in on the video, so I figured I would just give it its own section at the end. I didn't script any of this, so this is just my raw thoughts. Starting off with the world building, it's just so strong, and I think it's the best example of what a Spider-Man show can do. This series had 65 episodes, and over the course of those episodes, we see so much happen, and we're introduced to so many new characters. The character designs in the show were phenomenal. I love what they did with every character except for the Vulture. I hate the young Vulture look, but with the characters, the rogue gallery is such like a reoccurring thing in this show, and I love it. Other Spider-Man shows that I've watched, like, yeah, of course, they're gonna like break out of jail, and that's part of like Spider-Man media, but there's a real emphasis on the rogues gallery in the show, and I love it. One of the other things I really like is like the adult struggles that come with this version of Peter Parker. We really get to sit and watch how Peter struggles with finding love, going back from being with Felicia to MJ. He's always constantly having to choose to do the right thing, and I feel like in this version of Peter specifically, compared to other media and other like Spider-Man TV shows, I feel like this version of Peter gets it the hardest the most, and it's just something I respect. I love seeing Peter Parker in pain. I touched on this earlier with the subplot of Hydro Man, but the voice acting in this show is phenomenal. There's the iconic clip that I played earlier of Shocker, the clips of when MJ dies, but overall, I don't feel like there's really a whole lot of characters that are like lacking in the voice acting department. So there you have it. That's my review and recap of Spider-Man the Animated Series. Putting this up on the tier list, I have to put this show at S tier. It's such a fundamental staple for Spider-Man fans and Spider-Man media, and to be honest, I feel like I'd be burnt at the stakes if I didn't put this anywhere else. But that's about it. I really enjoyed making this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it just as much as I did. Gonna keep up with this series. I'm not sure what video I'll make next, but I know which show I will review if that's the next video I make. But that's gonna do it for now. Thank you guys for sticking around and supporting me through the channel. I really love making these videos, and it's obvious you guys like watching them, so thank you so much. Take care of yourself.
Take care of yourself.